A long time ago, on a comics page far, far away. Greetings and welcome to May the Panel Be With You, the Star Wars comic book show brought to you by the Punch Up Entertainment Network. I am your humble host, Mike Gargoni, and joining me, as always, the thousands of voices crying out in panic only to be suddenly silenced, it's John Campbell.
Yes, hello everybody. Well, here we go, Gargoni, back again. We just can't get away from this specific story.
Look, when you have a story as impactful as Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, or as it was originally titled when it was released in theaters, Star Wars,
yes,
you can't get away from people trying to tell this story over and over again in a bunch of different formats.
yes.
And I think comic books, having done 3 of these now, is no exception. And we are covering, another adaptation of A New Hope, but this time it is the manga version of it.
Yes, I mean, I will say I'm glad that it's certainly a change of pace, right? Like than what we've seen before with sort of I would say both of the other versions we've done have been cash grabs of a sort.
And look, make no mistake, I think this is also a cash grab, but it is a cash grab that is also like has a purpose as like an adaptation in a specific style and genre is the wrong word because a lot of people lump manga in as a genre and it's really not.
Well, it's the same thing. People do the same thing with comic books, right? And when they say that, they're talking about superheroes, and that's not entirely what that's really diminishing to the medium. But yeah, I will say the thing that struck me about this, and we were talking about doing this, and we were talking about doing it as 1 episode or 2 episodes, or how we're going to do this, and we ended up splitting into 2 episodes, which we'll be doing, was because I was reading this the other day and going, I want to dig a little bit deeper into this than just devoting an episode, simply because this is the most interesting to me in terms of like it has more of a take than either of the other ones. The 70s one is so slapdash. We talked about, we're inconsistent in the art. The one in the 90s was so much an attempt, like a shameless cash grab.
Right.
And this one is like, okay, this is clearly, as you're talking about, this is a translation of sorts into another culture's medium and art style of something that there's clearly a lot of passion for. And that being said, this is just probably the most interesting adaptation of the 3 we've done now.
Absolutely, for sure. And I hesitate to say this, but I also don't. I think it's the best of the 3.
I mean, well, once again, because it's I think that's true. Not only is it in format alone able to have a little bit more room to breathe and to capture some more of the moments of it, but like we're talking about, it's an actual take. By bringing it into this very specific style, it doesn't feel like it's trying to replicate the movie experience the way that the other ones did, because that's just set up for failure. Here is I'm going, oh, this is actually I was reading this going, oh, interesting that's this translation of this sequence or this character, the way something's rendered, as opposed to particularly the 90s one just going like, well, this is just a shittier version. Why am I not just watching the movie? Like,
you keep saying 90s version, but I should point out that, today we're covering Star Wars A New Hope hyphen manga number 1 and number 2. These were originally produced by Dark Horse Comics, and they were published, at least this first issue was July 15th, 1998. So honestly, not that far off from the adaptation we covered before.
Yeah, the special edition adaptation that we did, that was from Dark Horse, that was felt real, very much an afterthought.
Yeah. In terms of our creative team behind this, I want to start with the English side of this, which are mostly Dark Horse people. We've got our cover artist in Adam Warren. We'll get to the covers here in a minute. Adam Warren of Empowered fame, I think, is probably the book he's best known for.
Sure.
Which will explain why Princess Leia looks the way she does in this cover when we get to it.
Yes.
We've got letters, I guess the English letters, done by Tom Orzechowski, edited by Carrie Granzini, and we've got our designer in David Land. I want to point out the designer here specifically because of how this book is adapted and changed specifically for English audiences.
There's a note about it in the issue if you read it on Marvel Unlimited.
Yeah, and we'll get to that, and I want to talk about it a little bit. But specifically, we have as our creator Hisao Tamaki, which, despite our best efforts, we actually did put in a little bit of research time in this, because we were trying to dig a little bit into the manga artist behind this book and determine who they are, what they've done before, you know, doing our due diligence a little bit on this show.
God forbid. No.
God forbid. We could find scarce little about Hisao Tamaki. So I'm going to move forward making certain assumptions about them as an author. Specifically, I'm using the collective pronoun them, not because I don't want to differentiate them as a gender, but because I truly believe this is probably done by a team of people.
Right.
Because that is not uncommon in manga circles, and usually they will have some collective pen name that refers to multiple people working on a book. We've even seen that in certain American audiences. If you're familiar with the work of Gurahiro, that is an art team that works on those books like Unbelievable Gwenpool and Superman Smashes the Klan. They've done a ton of stuff.
Yeah. So that's, I would say, based on what scant evidence we could find, that is probably the most likely scenario. If you happen to know, please write in and let us know.
Yeah.
We're recording ahead, so that'll just be for our own notification if we don't address that next week.
But look.
But we always want to know.
Of the two of us, I'm probably I am the more well-read in terms of manga and Japanese novels and comic books just to begin with. But even my knowledge pales into comparison to the true otakus out there who live for this stuff and who is probably the target audience for this book.
For sure. I remember seeing this book around when it came out and pretty much ignoring it because well, I mean, I am not drawn to this particular style of comic books or this art style. I'm on the record. I don't besmirch anyone who is. But also just in general, too, as we've talked about before, I just don't get the appeal of these translations of other media into comic, like the direct adaptation stuff as much.
Sure.
And so well, I've seen the movie. So I pick this up. I go, hey, Star Wars characters. Oh, they're just doing A New Hope. Put it back down.
And that's totally fair, as opposed to something like Star Wars Visions, the show we've gotten over the last few years, which is specifically animation teams from around the world. The first season was exclusively Japan, but season 2 sort of broadened that aperture, bringing their own artistic take to original Star Wars stories. This was squarely an adaptation of something you were already familiar with.
So there's always sort of a well, I've done that, you know. Or sure. I know what this is going to be, so I put it down. Now, what's interesting is this show has made me, go back and look at these adaptations, and it is interesting now to look at them in isolation against one another. And yes, I said I think this is the most creative of the bunch in that sense of it. It feels the most like, oh yeah, this is not trying to replicate the film experience. It doesn't have particularly that 97 Dark Horse one really was trying to do very realistic, to the point where you're just going well, I'll just watch the movie then. It doesn't have the thing where it's this feels like somebody watching the movie and then interpreting it into a certain perspective.
Yeah, and I think those are maybe the more interesting adaptations that you might see, is that interpretation into another medium or another just art style in general, and how those cultural sensibilities reflect on a story that we're so familiar with. And I think this is a great example of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So let's get to that cover. And yeah, if you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to look along at the pretty art, because we start with this Adam Warren cover here that I think is indicative of what you're going to be getting for the rest of this book, and that is a very anime stylized take on Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, and I mean Darth Vader. You can't really futz with too much, but
no, he's a little bit more rounded out here. He's a little bit more cartoonish. Just in the translation to a drawing, but not, he's pretty classic. But then a very realistic Death Star.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the like highly detailed realism that they're going for in terms of like the ship drawings here, because there's some really impressive stuff.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And then there's an interesting dichotomy in how cartoonish the character design is, but yet how real world the world around them is.
And that is a classic thing you will see in lots of anime and manga, is like hyper detailed backgrounds to the point where, especially if you look like something that I think a lot of Western audiences have been exposed to at this point, is Miyazaki films and Studio Ghibli, and just how lovingly rendered the background art and details are, to the point where you can tell what parts are being animated and what is just a painting based on like how stuff is presented on the screen and like where the animation lines are, and like, okay, that stuff in the background's never gonna move, it's just painted onto the background. And they're not trying to make it seamlessly blend together. It's part of the art style, is just how stark in contrast some of that detail is.
Yes. Yeah. Let's dive in. I mean, I will say this is more aggressively manga or anime than the book, I feel like itself is. It's really, which I guess in some ways is right for the cover, right? Because it is telling you this is manga Star Wars.
Right, and it's getting you right off the bat of just like, look, if this is what you're looking for, this is what you're going to get. If this isn't what you're looking for, back away now and put it down, John Campbell.
Yep, that was it. So let's go into the book.
Let's dive into it. So yeah, we got the Star Wars listed as issue number 1, Star Wars: A New Hope. It says this all in Japanese though, so I'm sure most of our readers and listeners can't actually read that. And quite frankly, neither can I beyond the first line and the last line.
I just assume based on context is what it said, and then of course though it helps that when you turn the page, there it is in English.
There it is in English. Though this is the credits as presented in the Marvel reissue of this. So you have people like Joe Quesada and Dan Buckley listed as editors, when they had really nothing to do with the production of this book.
No. And then we get our note here when we go through we get our note here about the fact that yes, the Japanese printing of this would go right to left as opposed to left to right. So they've not only translated, but as they're pointing out here, they've basically flipped all the panels.
They've mirrored all the panels, which can lead to a few instances in this book of like where your eye line should be going from panel to panel, a little bit of confusion.
Yeah.
I think there are a few instances they're rare and few and far between, but there are a few instances in which like the panel order, how they're supposed to be read, are sort of screwed up by that fact.
Yeah. I didn't struggle too much with that on this, but yes, that certainly is in the translation of this stuff, because a lot of people when they pick up manga comics would be surprised that they start from what we would say is the end of the book backwards.
Right. Another thing you're going to notice when you're reading a comic that is an adaptation of a Japanese manga is how much space is in speech bubbles, depending on what's being said and what's being translated. Because if you'll notice on this page, they show off that the Japanese characters are written from right to left and from up to down. So the amount of space that is taken up by their speech bubbles changes pretty radically depending on what they're saying and where. And you'll even see some differences in the speech bubbles to where you have these real... I mean, I think these two panels are a perfect example of this. In what 3PO is saying in this panel, you've got the one big speech bubble on the right and then several sequential speech bubbles that have been edited into mirrored, flipped, and this really janky, like, combining of a bunch of the speech bubbles to make room for the English words that are going to be in there.
Sure. I mean, it's always any translation of anything. in any medium, there's always discussions about the best way to do it. I mean, people talk about subtitles in movies and stuff like that, and I've seen different approaches to it. You know, for the most part, they're pretty standard subtitles, but I've seen here and there people try to do more stuff with it. I mean, it goes to paint an interesting picture that it's not literally just the words that are different, and particularly when you're dealing in Japanese or something like that that has a whole different alphabet as well, and a different way that your eye is moving down the page. You know, you've got to address all those things if you want to bring this to an American audience.
No, absolutely. And the only thing I take like real umbrage with in terms of these sorts of translation is the flipping from the right to left to left to right. I think that like genuinely messes with the intention of the artist in terms of how they laid out the panels.
I mean, it does, and I see both sides of that, right? Like, because I also see the thing where it's like it's so. I mean, you'd have to train yourself, right, to do it the other way, you know?
Yeah, and as a guy who's read manga for most of his life, maybe I am a little bit more experienced on being able to read that sort of thing.
The other thing is, particularly with something like this, they're trying to appeal to a larger audience of just Star Wars fans. They're not just pitching to the manga audience that like would pick up a volume of My Hero Academia or whatever.
No, and look, I will be the first to say that it is an acquired skill, that reading from right to left is something you have to sort of pick up on.
It's the same thing when people talk about subtitles in movies, because while I don't read a lot of manga, I do watch a lot of films in foreign languages, because that sounds very hoity-toity of me there. I don't watch a lot of films in foreign languages. But no, it's just a thing where you start to go like, oh, I don't really have a problem with it, but I watch enough that it all kind of blends together. It's very easy. Same thing with comic books, even American comic books. People go like, "Oh no, do I look at the words or do I look at the pictures?" And I think you would answer the same thing as I do. Is like both. I don't know. Like it's just
the answer is yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's just second nature to us to be able to absorb that kind of format.
Yeah, but anyway, that's my brief soapbox on the art of translation. Yeah,
you know, I mean, and I get like, I mean, you bring up any of this stuff, and you get into European comics, and it's not the same stuff, but it's a similar thing about how do we translate. You're translating across cultures more as much as you are translating across language.
I will say what benefits the translation here more than anything is the fact that it is not being translated wholly from Japanese. It is an English text being translated into Japanese back into English, so they have the original Star Wars script to fall back on in terms of how they're translating this, which is super helpful.
So let's dive into the book here. It's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Yes, indeed. Star Wars. So here is our first little double-page spread. We're going to be getting a few of these. And for those watching along on YouTube, bear with me as I'm kind of editing on the fly to show off these double-page spreads. In our usual layout, we have the single page right in the middle of the two of our beautiful faces. But now we've got this much wider panoscopic view we've got to show off because, yeah, here is Star Wars with all of our characters. We know what we're getting. We're getting Luke, we're getting Leia, we're getting the droids, we're getting Tarkin, Vader, Old Ben, and Han and Chewie, all within the logo. I love the layout of this.
Very cool. I actually, it's one of those things where it's like, aside from the art style like that, just you could do this with American art and do the Star Wars logo like this, and I'd be cool with that. Han Solo's an iconic thumbs up. What?
Yeah, you know, Han Solo and all of his thumbs ups that he gives.
Constantly. It's his most... you know, whatever. So this is, we go to the next page with our crawl, which is just the one from the movie.
It's the one from the movie. Yeah, we know the crawl. We're going to be blazing through the pages here because, like, we all know Star Wars. We'll stop and highlight some of, like, the really exceptional art here. But, like, we've done this A New Hope adaptation quite a few times. We don't want to linger on every single page.
These are also very long. But they do move because a lot of it, there's a sense of momentum to this in a way that says you know the movie, but it isn't doing it in the hand-wavy manner of that 97 special edition one. But there is definitely a like you can speed through this in a certain way. And then yes, what's good about that is you then do stop when you go, oh, now that's an interesting render of that, because you're kind of rolling along going, oh, it's the movie I know, but hey, that's kind of an interesting take on Darth Vader.
Yeah. Or the framing of certain scenes that... Like, the word I kept using during the special edition adaptation is perfunctory. This feels anything but perfunctory. This feels lavishing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. This feels like a loving tribute to. This feels like it's made by people who love the movie and want to translate it in this way. And that's why I do think I enjoyed this the most, because it simply seemed to have the most passion in it.
Yeah.
We
start with our Starfield, and interestingly enough, we get ourselves right back down onto Tatooine, because we can never escape Tatooine, in a scene that is famously cut from the original movie, where Luke is seeing the pursuit of the Tantive 4 being chased by the Star Destroyer at the beginning of the movie. So we don't even get the classic, like, over-the-shoulder shot of the ships in this adaptation, which I found interesting.
Right. We start with Luke, which is, I mean, there's an argument that this maybe should have been included in the movie, if only to establish Luke as our protagonist, right? But so yeah, we're sort of connecting the guy on the ground with the battle in the stars.
Yeah. So I just found it interesting that this particular adaptation leans into the, like, Luke's life tying him to Tatooine a lot more in ways that, like, yeah, the 70s adaptation had that stuff in there, but it didn't feel as, I don't know, connective as it maybe was meant to.
They consciously are doing it here, right? Whereas in the 70s version, they didn't know those scenes weren't going to be in the final cut. True. So I do think there's more of this is a choice by the authors of this to go, we want to connect this, so we're doing that for a reason. They've thought about why they're doing that. In that, they were still being perfunctory. It's just now, in retrospect, that those scenes aren't in the movie, that it seems like, whoa, that's weird.
So yeah, we get this. Our next big 2-page spread is this huge shot of the Tantive 4 being chased by the Star Destroyer, not from the over-the-shoulder, but from a head-on perspective.
And it is very cool and very, like, intense. Look at the amount of, like, fire, and I mean, certainly, so this is all in black and white, obviously, which we've never. All the other stuff we've done has been in color to varying degrees,
which is kind of a manga staple. Specific, it's one of those things, like a lot of art styles, that started as a cost-saving thing and then eventually just became part of the style, because manga, as opposed to American comics, are usually produced weekly. So you will have books coming out at an incredibly rapid rate, and so you just don't have time to color a lot of these books.
This is true, and I think but the thing about this is that actually, in this case, further adds to what I'm talking about, where it feels like this is a new take on it. We're seeing it in black and white. It has an evocativeness that's different than we've seen from other comics, and the movies we're familiar with that are in color, of course. You're going like, whoa, I'm seeing this Star Destroyer, and the way the flames are coming off of this and stuff like that, and the explosion of it, and the planets and everything. And it just, there's something instantly captivating about seeing images that you know in a way you haven't seen them before.
Right. And we're immediately thrown into just like a little bit more how expressive this book is going to be when we get our first two little panels showing off R2 and 3PO as they're being tossed around as people are running back and forth inside the ship, and they're commenting on how this is madness.
Well, it's interesting too that just looking at this page with 3PO and R2 and then the rebel soldiers, is how even though these books are longer and ultimately have more time and page count in them than other, look at how much faster just in this one panel of these rebel soldiers moving around. The speed and intensity, which is definitely something I think of in both anime and manga, is obviously sort of the classic speed lines, the classic anime thing of the world swirling past people. But
and
just
again,
in general,
that's like was originally a cost-saving thing, so you didn't have to draw the backgrounds while characters are moving.
But I'm saying there's such more energy in this than in sort of the flatly stated other version, which was trying to save time. But here it just feels like, I mean, this whole progression of this up to then the exploding door on the next page. Love talk about the high detail on this stormtrooper's rifle.
Yeah, like we get to this page where the stormtroopers burst in. There's the Thoom. I love all of the sound effects done on this page and throughout. Obviously, these are a lot of Orzechowski's work in this, because a lot of these are in English where they wouldn't be otherwise, and some of them would have been in English originally, but some of them absolutely weren't.
And Orzechowski has been doing a lot of the '70s stuff that we've been reading.
Yeah, so that's a nice through line of Star Wars comics.
But yeah, these are all great. I often bag on the sound effects in the '70s books, but I love all these. A great thum, the zat zat, the zit zit zit. Like, how do you portray the sound of a laser blast? And it works.
And I love this next page with Vader's entrance.
Absolutely.
The idea that we get like our first introduction of Darth Vader in this particular art style context, and he is just this wall of black entering the middle of the page and showing off like he's a head taller in this adaptation than everybody else. He has to duck under the door to get into this place.
Immediately the cinematic nature of this compared to some of the other stuff we've done, the way it's the first thing we see is just the top of his helmet, and then it goes to the wide shot before it punches in on this close-up of him. It really does a lot to the kind of thing I'm talking about often in the other adaptations. Is like, okay, comics can't be movies, so you can't introduce character, but it's like oftentimes it's just kind of like, well, there you go, there's Darth Vader, you know what he looks like. This is actually thinking about how are we introducing this character as if you're seeing him for the first time in this movie.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, you can't futz with Vader's design too much. He's always going to be Darth Vader. But the way they show him off in shadows and the detailing in the line work, I think is just really, really
definitely
good.
Has this sort of Spectre of Doom kind of vibe to him in this that I love. The way, the way that his body just kind of melts into shadow in its lower half. Very cool, very scary.
And we'll get some excellent Vader art later in this issue too.
Yeah, and then just when we go to the next page, just more chaos of. I mean, they're being more expressionistic. They're not directly translated in the movie. There aren't this many laser blasts with 3PO dodging by them and stuff like that. But they're really creating the feeling of 3PO running through this massacre.
And honestly, that is what's happening in the movie, but it's not necessarily as condensed as it's portrayed in this.
That's what I mean. Yeah. The very. The choices of each thing, and there's also just stuff in here like this shot where 3PO is falling away from an explosion of some sort that I just don't think you could do in that Anthony Daniels costume.
No, or crawling along the ground as he is in that middle panel. Yeah. But we get the classic, and this is something I don't think was in either of the other adaptations, that classic like tableau of Leia leaning in towards R2 is recreated here at the bottom of this page.
Got to be in the top 10 most iconic images in all of Star Wars, right?
It's certainly up there.
And also knowing that there's no dialogue. That's the other thing, too. This book, more than the other ones we've seen, will let the action just carry itself. Which is
and they're not trying to describe what's being shown on the page. Which is such a sin of American comics and isn't done as much in manga.
It certainly is something American comics have been getting away from over the course of many decades. But by God, particularly in the '70s stuff we read, my God, the constant just like, no. You got to tell them what's going on.
What do you think? This is our first introduction to Leia, and on this next page here, we have her like hiding from the stormtroopers. What do you think of how this character looks? I'd be interested to get your take.
I mean, it's very what I think of as a manga drawing of a girl, right? Like
big eyes, small nose, small mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me say, it's kind of what I expected her to look like. I think the interesting thing about it is they've given her this hair that comes down under the bun. Like she's got the buns. In the movie, the buns are all of her hair rolled up into those. Here, there's more hair falling, which I think is kind of an interesting choice.
Plus the bangs are like giving this weird peak in the middle. Yeah.
I don't have any I don't know what the thinking behind that was, but
just a different design take. Obviously, like each of our main triumvirate of characters have like a manga take in this book. And sure. I want to stop on when we get introduced to each of them and kind of note the differences and like note the style changes, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, this is kind of what I think of as manga. And, it's reductionist, I know. But, I mean, certainly something that turns me off as a reader of manga is a lot of stuff kind of looks the same from the outset. And I want to state that once again because I know people love this stuff and I'm not besmirching it, but like when you look at the wall of the books at like a Barnes and Noble in the manga section, it all kind of looks the same to me in its presentation.
Sure. And that's a matter of like experience, how much you've spent time with it, and like knowing what details to look for, because the same could be said for Western superhero comics.
I have no doubt. Like I said, that's just from my perspective of it. And also, and I'm sure the same thing once again is just I grew up within it is there's 800 volumes of everything. But totally somebody could say that about Spider-Man, but I'd be like, what are you talking about? Because it's all just the context we have.
Right. We get our next good Vader moment here where he's snapping the neck. I love all the Vader neck snapping in this issue.
It's Vader is yeah, really absolutely brutal in this thing. The fact that we get an actual snap as a word, you know, a sound effect, good lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and him just like tossing the corpse to the ground.
And like the way this guy is getting choked and the sweat pouring off of him, and I just love all the expressionistic touches. Anytime the book goes away from some of the more true to movie details and goes into like we're just gonna capture the vibe of something, I think really makes this the adaptation. I would, if you're gonna read one comic adaptation, I would say it's this one.
Well, and that's what I think manga excels at, is catching the vibe of a thing. The art isn't meant to be taken literally. It's meant to be taken like expressionistically in terms of the emotions it's trying to convey a lot of times. And I think it does that through exaggeration and through like overt amounts of detail.
And I think we've seen a lot more of that as comics, American comics and Western comics in general have progressed, is you've started to see a lot more of that influence in it. Also in animation too, right? Like
totally,
definitely, yeah. I mean the whole idea of they're ever intertwining, right? The Japanese and Western animation, and they're taking influence from one another. So
absolutely,
you know, I think the barrier between them is shrinking all the time.
We get Leia getting stunned. We get the droids escaping. I really like this next double page spread we get to, as we get all of the details of this wide shot of hurtling down towards Tatooine, and also like we have this big empty, not empty, but like big spacious rendering of the escape pod. All the while we have that first interaction between Vader and Leia down at the bottom of the page. I think it's a good counterpoint to each other in terms of page layout and design.
I don't mean to keep harping on the other comic, but it is sort of, it's hard because that's the most recent adaptation we did.
Sure.
And the thing about this is the cross-cutting in this kind of stuff makes so much more sense than when they would just randomly put like a couple panels where it's like, oh, we got to put in some Vader dialogue. Can we just jam 2 panels of Vader on the Death Star into the middle of this other scene? You're like, wait, what? This flows so natural. Like I said, there is a cinematic structure to this. I mean, it is literally adapting a movie, but as we've seen before, that doesn't necessarily lead to a cinematic experience in a comic book. But this is so smartly edited like a movie in terms of like, we're going to cut here, place here. I mean, we talk about this a lot. The placement of and sizing and layout of a page is so important to a comic book. It's kind of an invisible art until you see it done poorly.
Well, and it's specifically juxtaposing one done poorly with one done well. It makes the differences so much more clear.
This does some great inserts of these close-ups too, like when you just have over in the left-hand corner of this double-page spread of that little close-up of Leia. It just, you know, I don't know where it feels like the reverse angle in a movie, right? It's like, here comes Vader walking, cut to Leia's reaction, cut to the 2-shot of them.
Well, and we cut to the next page, which is also another double-page spread, where the vast majority of the background is taken up by just this lovingly detailed shot of the Star Destroyer, and all the panels around it are showing us the action happening inside.
Once again, something that it doesn't have that random cutaway to the outside that I was complaining about in that wheel thing where you're like, it's placing all of this within the context of, we're getting an exterior shot, but all the panels are connected to it, so you get in the sense of, all this is happening there. And also, talk about expressionistic, the terror of this, sort of visualizing the Force or whatever around Vader.
Yeah, "You're part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away." Yeah.
Whereas I love
Vader. In the movie, you just have David Prowse kind of gesturing inside the Vader suit. Here, it is a moment of doom as Vader is underlit by the Force. Yeah,
this really portrays him as this horror like monster movie character, which I love, and doing the all black, but then making his eyes white in that. Very cool. I mean, that's the thing. It's like if you're gonna move it to a drawing based medium, this is really taking advantage of like, oh, we can do things that a movie just wouldn't be capable of.
Speaking of taking advantage, we're sticking with our double page spreads here when we cut down to Tatooine and the droids. We've complained often that, like, one of the things you could probably trim down in A New Hope is the droids wandering around the desert bits.
It's one of those things where it's like, dude, it's a masterpiece. The movie is obviously amazing. That could lose 5 minutes and probably be a better movie as a result of it.
And I think this book has its cake and eats it too, because it's definitely longer than the wandering around bits we got in the special edition adaptation, but it cuts it down while also giving us this sense of space and wasteland in Tatooine, especially on this first double page where we have like the whole background is just the open vacuous desert, and then we get the insert panels
I don't
of
think
R2 and 3PO bickering.
I think this is the first comic we've done on the show that shows the expanse of that, the endless desert that the movie captures, because they actually went out to Tunisia and filmed like out where they shot Lawrence of Arabia and stuff like that. And it has that, like, just, you're just like, there's nothing around. And these two little figures of these little droids, I like every time they keep it pretty wide on most of these panels to show they are just these two little beings within this mass empty desert. And you're like, where are these things? Where are they going to go? How are they going to survive? It's great.
And this page is definitely where we start seeing just how kind of expressionistic this can get, especially where droids are concerned, because something we've already complained about in the past, I don't know if complained is the right word, but definitely remarked on in the past, is how weird they can deform 3PO's face to try to express emotions. And this book doesn't do that to the same extent because it does it in different ways. The way it shows expressionistic things with the droids is by adding like sweat lines and little emojis and little things around the droids that express what they're feeling and how they're reacting to things without actually changing the form.
I think it's on the next page where you have 3PO panic waving his hands.
Yeah, when we get to that scene where he's just like, over here, over here.
Yeah, and it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think he is violently gesturing like this in the movie. Once again, limits of the costume, but like that is the feeling. You're talking about the expressionistic nature of it. Is like, oh yeah, it's this thing, and it's just the motion of it, and choosing when to have the detail in his face, or when we go out wide and there's less detail on his face. All that stuff is great in terms of not. You are adding expression to 3PO, but not doing things where you're messing up his face and going, well, 3PO's face doesn't really change, and even if this is an expressionistic medium, you're now taking him off model.
Right. And what they do with R2 in terms of adding little, like, sweat lines, or like I said, having him speak in emoji, I think is really clever, because, like, we all know what R2 sounds like in our heads. You don't even necessarily need to have the sounds in a speech bubble. Just say what those sounds are expressing. When we get the little, like, woo, like the sad R2 noise, just having the little teardrop in the speech bubble perfectly conveys that sound in my brain.
Mm-hmm. And so we get R2 wandering onto the rocks. Of course, we get the Jawas taking him. I love the portrayal of the Jawas and all the just like you know.
we get a Utini.
Yeah. Ooh, is that a new word?
I don't know. Adding a Y to the beginning of Utini weirded me out a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I see where it's coming from, but
but it's wrong.
But I do like the dabbit wobble wobble wobble, like, because that is just like the nonsense sounds they're making.
Well, what I love in comics is when you do like this, where there's all this stuff. It's like you're not meant to sit there and go, that one's saying dabbit, that one's. It's just like, what aren't you just getting the cacophony of noise in this group of them? And then the way even that the word bubbles kind of stop being word bubbles, and they're just these emanations of words coming from them as they're walking away. It's like and they're walking, very smart stuff like that. And then beautiful rendering of the Sandcrawler.
Oh, I love how the Sandcrawler looks in this book. such fine detail in terms of just like that is what it looks like in the movie. We all know it.
This is what in the movie, but it's the shading of it, it's the coloring of it, the shadows of it that make it feel huge and imposing in this very art. Like I want this wide shot. I would put this up as a piece of art of just the big sand crawler, the single panel of that is a very cool, and then the little beans carrying R2 into it.
And like that, we've covered our droids lost in the desert bit in 4 pages. Great.
Yeah, and it's all very well done. All of it, but it's the thing where it's like all of the stuff that's in the movie is there, and they've done it very succinctly. And yet, it doesn't, because these are longer. It doesn't feel like, we just gotta get through this once again. It's all very smartly done. And then and this is something that I feel like manga and anime have been very good at, is the horrors of these destroyed robots. A lot of the stuff I've seen is messed up robots and things like that is pretty common in this stuff. So, man, this is the scariest thing I've seen of like the scraps of robots inside the sandcrawler.
And it kind of does that bit in the movie where 3PO lurches out of the junk and R2's like surprised isn't really horror in the movie or even a jump scare. But in this, it's sort of like this shadowy figure coming out of the
white
junk
eye.
And yeah.
And yeah, you're like, yeah, R2's right to be scared.
Mm-hmm. I like R2's top literally coming off.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's how scared R2 is. Yeah, that doesn't happen in the movie, but like, that's how R2's reacting to the situation.
They are doing a good job of doing the thing, once again, and that's the expressionistic thing we've been talking about of, okay, it's not a movie, I can't see things in motion or actually hear the sound, so we're going to take some license to do the drawings and renders of these characters a little bit more extreme to put you in the emotional state of them.
Yeah, exactly. We get, look, sir, droids, and we're getting through the movie as like, but we're not leaving anything out, which I do appreciate.
No, we're moving through all this. We can kind of run through here.
We get our introduction of Luke and Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. What do you think of the Luke here?
He's very cherubic, right? He's very innocent, which I think that kind of works for the expressionistic nature of this innocent kid. He feels younger than he does in the movie. You know what I mean? Here he feels like he could be 13, 14, or he's 20, 21 in the movie.
And that is definitely a thing in anime and manga as well, is characters being portrayed way younger than they actually are. Sure. There are some anime characters and manga characters where it's like, okay, on their little bio it says they're 28, but like that couldn't be older than 14.
Well, how old is like Ash from Pokemon supposed to be? Because
10 technically, but like he's been 10 for 20 years.
Yeah. That's what I mean. He always that's very much the vibe I'm getting here too, right? It's very that I think of that as sort of an anime leading character of being these sort of like young, very angelic looking, specifically boys.
Yeah. Cherubic, I think, is a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's got very, very long, kind of like sweepy hair.
Yep.
Another trope of the medium is that kind of like see-through hair, so you can see the eyebrows and the eyes through the hair.
Well, and that's, I mean, and the string. It's the same thing with the Leia design, right? Too. They love sort of the strings of hair and that come down. I really do think of that as sort of anime hair, right? There is sort of a
it's either this or unnaturally spiky, right? There's no in between.
That's it exactly. Yeah. So we got Luke. I love all the little insert things. If we go to like the next page here, where you just see Luke's feet on the sand. I love all that stuff that just feels like little details of movement and things like that just carry you from place to place and give you more of a sense of motion.
On this next page, is this the kindest Uncle Owen's ever looked?
I think so, yeah.
Because he just looks like a fairly friendly old man in this. And every other adaptation we've seen, he's like some grizzled monster drying out in the desert.
Very cartoonish. And by that I mean like American comic strip cartoonish. Like the little dots for eyes and stuff like that.
I'm getting some Tintin vibes.
Yeah, yes, very much Tintin.
Which I know is not American, but...
No, but yeah, it is. But in that way, or like Jim Davis, Garfield. I mean, that kind of thing where it's like it's very simple little circles and dots and stuff like that. And it definitely makes him kind of. I mean, my God, the '70s Marvel book. He's a goddamn monster in it.
Yeah, and of course we have like some nice little details here in that aren't really shown off in the movie, but I think this book does a pretty good job of highlighting the fact that like 3PO and R2 are like cleaner and shinier than everything else they're looking at here.
Yes. Which would make sense because we saw this junk pile of robots inside that that are in different pieces and stuff like that. And yeah, so we getting so they get the robots as always.
R4 has a little meltdown, but clearly he's connected to the Force, so that he knows that he must sacrifice himself so that R2 can go along and further Luke's journey.
Yes. Yeah. Lest we forget.
Hey
man, R4 though has made a big comeback on The Mandalorian.
It's true, he has. Good for him.
I was so glad he finally
got his motivator unit fixed.
Yeah, man. But okay, yeah, and he goes up in this in a way. Once again, the expressionistic nature of this. When he goes up in this thing. And then talk about cartoonish. That Uncle Owen reaction where they're doing the sharp face turn. He's like, "What?
What are you trying to push on us?"
Yeah. Not so nice all of a sudden there. All right, so we go back to the old homestead. 3PO's in his oil bath.
We got Luke cleaning up R2 and 3PO. I like that we get this exterior shot of the T-16 back home outside the bath here.
Yes, that's nice. It gives you a sense of place, and of course also links Luke to the piloting stuff.
This next page, though, is where we get, I think, our most interesting addition to this book, which is retroactively adding the Biggs like leaving home stuff, but not as a scene that's happening in the book, but one that Luke is thinking back to. I think this is a super interesting take.
It actually is something that I've always talked about, which is just like, if you cut the scene with Biggs at the beginning, when Biggs comes back later, he has no impact. Here, they've kind of solved that by, yes, not inserting what is objectively an unnecessary scene that does, halt momentum early on. Mm-hmm. But here they give you a link to Biggs and the importance he has on Luke in this, so that when he comes back later, I'm assuming we're not going to get there today, but maybe he'll come. No, when he comes back later, it'll. I just want to bring up the fact, though, that 3PO toweling off is a little disturbing to me.
Hey, look, he's a perfectly functional droid who is capable of toweling himself off, John. It would be weirder if Luke was doing it for him.
You're right. Yeah, that's true. I really don't want to see Luke wiping him down. So yeah, we get this is something that I've never thought of the projection of Leia on this next page here as being as explosive as presented here.
Yeah, there's a little bit, and the book has some of this going forward, is a little bit more of those over-the-top reactions. Not necessarily for, like, expressionistic purposes, but sometimes for comedy purposes. Because if there's one thing they love in manga and anime, it's a good pratfall.
Absolutely, and that is definitely something that has... tone has often been a thing that's kept me out of a lot of anime in particular, watching where you're just like, whoa, suddenly they went from very serious to extremely broad. And I think that is just a cultural thing where it's just like, yeah, that would not flip anyone, but here you'd be like, what? If there were suddenly pratfalls in the middle of a Mission Impossible movie, you'd be like, what? Mm-hmm. But over there, that's totally just the norm.
Sure. Someone saying something awkward that throws another character off of their groove makes them literally fall over.
Yes, that sort of thing. And you even see it in the live action. It's not just in the... It just is, it's a cultural sense of humor thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we get the Help Me Obi-Wan stuff.
R2 totally fools Luke into removing the restraining bolt, as per usual. Luke being like, hey, what's the big deal, you little droid? Old Hermit. I'm sure Ben Kenobi and Obi-Wan Kenobi are not related at all.
How could they be?
One's named Ben.
Yeah, one's named Obi-Wan and one is named Ben. Come on, totally different guys.
Oh, you mean of the Tatooine Kenobis? Yeah, I know at least 4 of them.
So yeah, they okay, so we go through all this. This is all pretty standard stuff. I don't have a whole lot to say about this. We've talked about
Uncle Owen and Beru talking about, hey, you got to stay for another season. Luke being like, oh, but I think these droids will work out. Owen being like, hey, no, I need you to stick around. But then when we get to our next 2-page spread, we get the binary sunset, or at least leading up to it.
Another panel I would happily put up on my wall is this. The once again and some of this is that thing about the black and white, the ink wash of it and stuff, the way they're doing the sunset here. It's beautiful in the movie with the sort of magic hour lighting of it here, and here they make it beautiful using a completely different style.
Yeah, exactly. We get Beru's little comments here saying that he's too much of his father in him, and Owen responding with, that's what I'm afraid of. And I think this book...
Why? What happened to his father, Gergoni?
More than the other adaptations, because again, the special edition is more perfunctory, and the 70s comic didn't know, but leans on the dramatic nature of that line in retrospect once we know who his father is.
Well, and, matching it here, overlaying the dialogue on top of this feeling of Luke that in the movie is this silent moment with this gorgeous John Williams score. Of the man yearning for adventure, and then Owen, that being the reflection of, well, that's what happened to Anakin, and we know what happened to him. Or do we? I'm sorry, this is no spoilers. I don't know what happened to who's Anakin.
Right. But on the next page, we
get more flashbacks to Biggs.
Yeah. So the idea that while Luke is standing there looking at the twin sunset, he's thinking. Like in the movie, it's just that image of him looking off into the sunset, and that is that yearning for adventure.
It could be in this, right?
Yeah. And in this, and in maybe even like a good novelization, we have this moment coupled with internal monologue of him literally thinking of the guy saying, I'm going off on an adventure.
Right. It's literally not only I'm looking for specifically the adventure that my friend is going on. I'm not only yearning for this, but I actually have this example of the guy who escaped. Because I mean, that's the whole thing about why Luke is such a relatable protagonist, right? We all can relate to being like, I wish I was part of a bigger world in some way, right? It's like, I want to escape my home. I mean, that's George Lucas very much. It's one of the reasons it's some of the best Lucas stuff is because he's actually writing a personal thing about being in a small town and wanting to be part of a bigger world and a more exciting world and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like how they intertwine the cut big stuff into this adaptation. I think it's really very clever and well done.
And also using it all written narration as opposed to word bubbles, making it that sort of memory that is the case. And yeah, it's almost the thing where you're almost going like, man, I don't think Lucas would have thought about this, but you probably could have found a way to do something like this in the movie if you were desperately trying to figure out how to get those big scenes in there.
Yeah,
I don't think you need to. It's not an actual thing, but it's an interesting, like, oh, there's an idea of how to put bigs in there more.
Yeah, we get Luke coming back into the homestead, realizing R2 has gone. We have him looking around, being like, "It's not safe to go out at night." Again.
Ungodly terrifying 3PO coming out of the darkness.
And kind of like panicking, being like, I told him not to go.
Yeah, but the way that the light's coming off of his eyes and you're just like, God!
So we get to something that is another addition to this comic that I found extremely interesting. And they do it twice in the issues we're going to be covering. And that is adding dramatic irony to this book that isn't in the movie, because we cut now from this starfield back to the Sandcrawler, which is not a thing that happens in the movie. And then on the next page,
this isn't like a cut scene or anything either, is it? I don't know from anything other than this.
We have this bright flash as a flare is going off in the hands of a stormtrooper, and we get revealed.
So cool, and it would in no way fit with the visual style of A New Hope, but it has a concept in a Star Wars story of just the igniting of a flare and the troop, the squad of troopers. So cool.
So we get this reveal of a bunch of troopers on Dewback, like attacking the the Sandcrawler, which is implied in the movie, but to like dramatic irony, like show that of the Stormtroopers showing up and blowing up the Sandcrawler is really cool.
And it's so effectively done here, where you see the light up of the troopers, and then the terrified expression, and then just the still image of the burning Sandcrawler from way back, and it's just you don't see any of it. It's just like, yeah, they just destroyed them, man. They had no chance.
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's one of those scenes that like I never thought I needed until I read this adaptation of just like, oh yeah, and the Stormtroopers destroy the Sandcrawler. We all know that happens.
Yeah. And that's the thing where it's like nobody ever thought to put that in. It's not this is a totally original idea of this, and yeah, I was also very struck by like how cool and using their own, like I said, that lighting stuff wouldn't make any sense in the movie we know of as A New Hope, but in this, it's so cool. And I look, if and when they ever give me a Star Wars movie, when that shows up in it, you'll know that I stole it from this.
I also appreciate the slight distance in the panel gutters at the bottom of this page, implying that more time is passing.
Yes. That's something also that's very smart in terms of this. And also that it cuts to this and then it cuts back to Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. It's going... It would be weird if this went to the next page and it was immediately still the land speed. You'd be like, why did that start there? But it goes... It's like a scene cut and then back to another thing, and then we're going back and forth.
Yeah. So we get Luke off on his land speeder going off to try to find R2. We get a brief bit of the Tusken Raider up on the ridge, kind of aiming at him. We get that brief interaction between the two Tuskens, which is like, no, we'll get this kid. Don't worry.
It's all very cool. We get a single word, which is a ryonk, and then just a question mark, exclamation point. And yet I understand what they're saying.
Yeah, and later, much later, we'll establish that the Tusken Raiders in The Mandalorian have this whole sign language thing worked out, which kind of plays into that here.
Yep. Boy, talk about the Mandalorian is doing nothing but redeeming characters and things from A New Hope, right?
Absolutely. So eventually we do find R2. Uh-oh, they're sand people. We're just going to brush over the fact that they're still calling them sand people.
I mean, they're being true to the movie.
Sure. And then Luke is attacked by a Tusken Raider here. We get this awesome amounts of just like big slam with the gaffy stick. We get Luke's rifle being chopped in half by this guy.
That is not in the movie, and I like that. That's also very cool. There's just so much more like visceral nature to this, right? Like the just like they break things a little bit more. Stuff explodes a little bigger. It is making the cartoonified version of this that really works on the page.
Totally. We have Luke unconscious. The Tusken Raiders.
Around, it's like Jesus.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, they're not gentle with Luke Skywalker in this.
No, they are not. They are not. That kid got beat to shit, man. So they, and then we get the. Ow!
Yeah, it is the whatever noise that Obi-Wan makes that scares away the Tusken Raider, because it's changed a few times now.
Yeah, and I've come to learn there's just no good way to put it into letters, is there?
No.
It really is like a gutter, like in the movie. It's not like a thing you can really put syllables to.
It depends which movie you're watching, which version of it.
That's also true, because that has actually changed in the cuts of the movie. Yes.
Yes.
All I know is Alec Guinness probably didn't make any noise on set.
Right.
We get Alec Guinness, George. I'm not making a silly noise. They're ronking and yonking their way out of there. For sure. I mean, I was gonna say I'm more drawn to the thing about Adam Warren, and once again, no slight on. I don't want but it is just like what once again that cover and stuff like that. It's more manga than manga. It's that thing where it's like when you're trying to reference something, you end up becoming an even bigger. You turn it into the bigger stereotype of it in some ways, right? It's so that I'm more impressed by the art in the book. I think the cover to me does a disservice, as it really turns me off of going like, oh my god, that's the most manga thing I've ever seen, to when you actually open this up and you go, wow, look at how cool this is. Like the cover to me embraces a lot of the stuff that turns me off about manga, when the actual interiors are, I think, so well rendered for the most part, minus a couple of things that I pointed out for me. So that's my only point about it, is I feel like this does a disservice to people who might have otherwise picked up a Star Wars thing to see an interpretation, just going like, oh God, what is this?
Yeah. Not sure. I think it is more of a litmus test thing for me, where it's just like, maybe it should be a little bit more like more manga than manga, just to be like, look, you got to know what you're getting right up front, or else you're going to be.
Well, I mean, I've never picked this up until now, and I was pretty impressed with this, as once again, particularly as something that is referencing the thing I know that we've seen other versions of. It's an interesting translation that has a take and a style, which we've been missing from the other versions.
Totally. I'm really glad you enjoyed this, John. Not gonna lie, I was not sure how you were going to respond to this book.
Well, I mean, it's still playing on something I know, so there's a familiarity to it. But like I said, because it's so familiar, I think it makes me more interested in the experimental nature of it, or more interested in, like, I want to see a more vivid take on it, as opposed to just being the thing that that's always the thing I come back to with the adaptations, whether that be the novelizations of movies or comic book adaptations. Always just like, yeah, but I could just watch the movie. Why am I doing, beyond like the covers of stuff or just seeing individual, drawings of scenes, it always kind of, once again, clearly there are people who enjoy them because they keep making them, but
sure.
It's always just a thing to me where it's like, I remember having the Batman '89 adaptation comic book, and it was cool, but it was just a thing kind of sat on my shelf because I could just put in my copy of Batman '89 and watch it.
Sure. No, and I think clearly, our initial intent was to cover the first two issues here, but we've had so much to say that maybe breaking this up more sequentially.
The reason we did this is because we did the individual 97, and we were going, well, there really wasn't much here to talk about. Here, there actually is something to talk about. In reverse, we should have, in retrospect, we should have done that all as one episode. We could have easily done all four of those as one episode, no question. Whereas here, there actually is interesting stuff to dig into, and choices to examine and go, oh, why have they done this? Oh, that's the thing about this, is I do like seeing they've made a choice, and we can actually discuss, oh, why did they do that? What does that say? How does that influence the story? Whereas the other one is just like, well, you've drawn some Star Wars. Okay, So we'll devote our next few episodes to this, and also these are long. These are like 65-page, issues.
80.
Well, they're 80 on the thing. I mean, not including the.
That's true. Not including the intro pages and stuff. Yeah.
But yeah, they're in the 70-ish range. Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, like 3 times the size of an American issue.
Yeah. And so yeah, we this was a test, I guess, in some ways. We thought we would blaze through it, and then we ended up stopping more than and that was sort of what I was saying too, because initially we talked about the idea of, and here's just inside baseball, folks. And by the way, I mean the complete opposite of baseball, which is talking about Star Wars comic books. But that's the exact opposite of athletics.
Both have trading cards.
This is true, and actually, that's always a fascinating thing to me. Is the nerd mindset for fans of both is actually pretty similar. But when we were talking about this, the initial idea was, let's just pull out individual things, and that's why I texted you the other day as I was reading this. I'm going, I was going to pull out too many. I was writing down like this page is, and then I realized like this is going to end up being the whole goddamn thing anyway, because I'm pretty fascinated by all these renderings of characters and stuff. So there you go.
I'm really excited to talk next issue then, because we will get to Han Solo, we will get to Chewie, we'll get our Cantina sequence. I think there's some interesting differences and like hewing to the original in interesting ways.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see, their take on Han and Chewie and all that stuff, because I do think this also shows a lot of restraint in going like, well, we don't want to just jam in all the popular, because I do think sometimes the place of where it gets like, well, we can't have an issue 1 without Han and Chewie being in it. People want that,
But they did.
They did, and it makes sense.
Yeah, no. We talk about like where it chooses to cut off. I think this is a really thematically interesting part 1 of a 4-part story is like, This is when we're hitting our low point of everything's being destroyed. In terms of Luke's parents and Leia being tortured. It's really good.
I think this makes a lot of sense to end it here, and we've talked about some of the baffling choices made in the other adaptation. So
Totally.
All right. Well, so next week we'll be back with issue 2 of the Star Wars manga adaptation of A New Hope, specifically.
Can't wait. Yeah. In the meantime, best way to help support the show is subscribing over on YouTube. You can watch along with us as we're reading through. And if you're watching on the YouTube, we can show off those big 2 double-page spreads that are so cool and I've found so engaging.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's some really incredible art in here. And of course, the other way to support the show financially is to go over to our Patreon page, which is patreon.podbean.com/punchup.
Probably is the best way to support the show is financially.
It depends. I mean, this helps too. Don't believe me; those subscriber counts help us. You know, we're trying to get monetized on here as well. We want money no matter what. This is. I'll take whatever money we can get. We'll talk about anything, man. But no, it's anyway. You can go over there and get cool exclusive bonus content from this and all the shows on the Punch Up Entertainment Network. Absolutely. And also make sure you subscribe to those shows as well. The Action Shelf, Material Components, Campbell and Jones Meet the Monsters. All that stuff is here on our YouTube channel as well as on whatever podcatching software you use.
Absolutely. And of course, this has been May the Panel Be With You. As always, I have been Mike Gargoni.
I'm John Campbell.
And remember, may the panel be with you.